Welcome to another English Language A-Level video with me, Paul, from the QE Darlington. And this one is a language investigation video, which is about the secrets of how you should be writing your methodology. Okay, so the methodology is placed in the folder after the introduction, and it's put before the analysis, and it should be round about 200 words. It needs to be written in the past tense. What you're doing in your methodology is you're explaining the processes that you went through in your investigation and some of the issues that you encountered in doing it and the ways that you got round those particular issues. Let's have a look at a methodology to start with. So you're going to read a student's methodology, and I want you to think about these things. So first of all, how was the data selected and collected and presented? Secondly, how was the data analysed? And then thirdly, what issues emerged and how did the students resolve those particular issues? It's 2 paragraphs. Here's the first paragraph. The data was selected from 2 DVDs of popular TV dramas featuring contemporary UK courtroom scenes of broadly similar situations, contentious murder cases with highly adversarial techniques used by the prosecuting and defending teams. The selected scenes were timed equally to enable like-for-like comparison. Transcription proved time-consuming, but was valuable in revealing to me some of the complexities of the data, such as the vital part played by timing and non-diegetic sound. Prosodic features, essential to effects on the audience, proved a challenge to represent in the transcript. Variations in stress, pitch, volume and speed were represented by a system of symbols. Now that's a pretty good first paragraph, isn't it? So how has the data been selected? Well, we're told in the first 2 sentences how it's been selected, because the student is telling us that she's focused on courtroom scenes. The courtroom scenes that she's managed to find are broadly similar. They're to do with murder cases. And in the action as well, the prosecuting and defending teams are using a kind of adversarial techniques. So like for like. And also they were timed equally. So it was not like one was 15 minutes long and the other one was 5 minutes long. So it enabled like for like comparison. So that's how this student selected their data. Then it's all about collecting the data, the transcribing. And one of the issues that the student draws attention to was that transcription was time consuming, which it usually is, because if you are transcribing, and we usually say in language investigations you need to be transcribing round about 6 sides, that's going to take some hours. So it's time consuming, so that was an issue. But what she's stating is that actually it was important that I did that because then I got to understand about the complexities of the data, such as the timing, i.e. the presence of silences and pauses, and non-diegetic sound, which is one of those media studies terms, means the sound or the music that's put over the top of action in film. Okay, and then in the last sentence, it talks about prosodic features. So prosodic features are those things, the musical features of your speech, like intonation and stress and volume and those sorts of things. And she's basically saying, look, they were important to represent in the transcript. Yeah, so that's another issue. But she got round that by producing a sort of set of symbols, a set of symbols there to demonstrate these variations in prosodic features. So it's a pretty effective first paragraph that basically tells us how the data was selected, collected and presented. Okay, now we're on to the second paragraph. The transcripts were annotated in different colours according to the language levels. Grammar was selected as the first area to evaluate, with emphasis placed on variations between the prosecuting and defending counsel in sentence features, functions, types, and length. The analysis of the effects of different kinds of interrogatives proved particularly interesting. However, producing reliable figures to contrast sentence types and functions became problematic, as it was not always straightforward to demarcate beginnings and endings of utterances. In terms of discourse, the terms of address, mean-length utterances, and deviations from Grice's conversational maxims all provided interesting comparative material. Unlike under Lexis, collocations were identified and Yowser's levels of formality were applied to the data. Okay, so the focus on this second paragraph is a little bit different because it's all about the analysis. So whereas the first paragraph is about, how you've selected and collected and presented your data, your second paragraph is all about the annotation. And what this is clearly demonstrating is that there wasn't just random things going on here, but there was a very careful, systematic focus put on the different language levels. First of all, we have about grammar. I was going to say grandma there, but I resisted that. Grammar. And under grammar, this student was looking at sentence functions and sentence types and sentence length. And she particularly points out as question forms, interrogatives, as being particularly interesting. Okay, but what she also does is that she gives us an issue with this, because of course if you're looking at speech and you're transcribing it, people actually don't talk in sentences, they talk in utterances, and therefore it's difficult to demarcate the beginnings and the ends of utterances. Okay, so she's told us about the grammatical area that she's looked at, but she's also made it known that there were sort of issues and problems with her being able to do that. Then she's gone to a different level and she's earmarked and discourse what she's looked at. So terms of address, which means that the sort of names that people give towards each other. Mean length utterances, which is basically how long people speak in interactions. And then you've got about Grice's conversational maxims, i.e., are the people adhering to your expectations of most successful talk? Okay, and then we've got a third language level, which is identified, which in this case is Lexis, and she's identified that collocations were identified. And also she's applied good old Yaus, so Yaus's levels of formality. Now that is a textbook methodology that is going to get an A/A star. Okay, so that's what you're trying to achieve in your methodologies. So here, let's just break it down. You are writing 2 paragraphs. Your first paragraph should explain how your data was selected, collected, and presented. And when I say selected, think about this. Of all the possible data sets that you could have chosen, why did you choose this data? I'm not saying why did you choose that topic, because you would have treated that in your introduction. I'm saying, why have you chosen that particular data? So if, for example, you're looking at the language of comedy in Friends, why have you chosen that particular episode? And why have you chosen those particular scenes in that episode? You want to give the impression that your choice wasn't random, that there was some kind of devious selection criteria that you undertook. Okay, so that's the first bit. The next bit is, how did you go about collecting your data? And did you encounter any sorts of ethical or practical issues in collecting your data? Now, some of you are doing primary data, where you're actually going off and interviewing people and collecting primary data like that, in which case this is the place for you to discuss about possible ethical issues. And the big one there, of course, is observer's paradox. Observer's paradox is the tendency that human beings have to change their language when they know that they're being recorded. So this is a problem, because if you're trying to collect naturalistic data and yet people change the way that they speak when they're being recorded, that is a problem. So were there ways that you got round observer's paradox? Were there any practical issues in collecting your data? Even if your data was just taking clips off YouTube, were there any practical issues in that? Were there, for example, issues with audibility with some of the speakers? Or was it fully obvious the social context around the clips that were chosen? Okay, so we've got those sorts of things. And then how did you present your data so it could be easily understood by a wider audience? If, as on that previous student, they're saying, prosodic features like stress and intonation and volume, they're really important elements on this. Well, how on earth could you present this in a transcript? Because at the end of the day, your marker is not listening to the piece, they're not watching the piece, they're just looking at your representation of it on a piece of paper. Okay, so that's your first paragraph. It's about how your data was selected, collected, and presented. Now, your second paragraph is about your analysis. So you need to be explaining how the data was analysed, and you need to be thinking about the levels that you chose. And probably you've done 3 different levels. So let's say you've done grammar and lexis and pragmatics, let's say, and then you need to be earmarking within those levels what were the particular areas of focus. And if you've used presentational devices like fancy bar charts and graphs and things, there's your opportunity to be explaining, well, why have you particularly used them on that particular area? And also, what issues arose when you were analysing the data? It may well be that when you were analysing some element of discourse, let's say you thought, right, interruptions and overlapping between these speakers, that's going to be an interesting area to look at. When you actually got down to it, you found that there actually weren't any interruptions, or that the whole thing was too messy to find any patterns. So that was an issue that you discovered, and it may well be that you resolved that actually you're not going to put that analysis into your analysis, or you may have shifted it into your appendix. Okay. And then, in terms of the style that you're using, you've got to be using the passive voice, because if you're doing this report style, then you can't be using I all the way through. I did this, because that's too personalized. So the passive voice is good because it focuses on the processes that are undertaken rather than on you, the investigator. So, as always, make sure that your language is really precise and concise, because if you only got 200 words, then you haven't got space for verbiage. Okay, so if you're in my class, I'd be getting you to be reading another methodology. Now, the one that I'm looking at is on the top of page 29 in our booklet. I'm going to show you this on the screen in a minute, but I want you to think about these 2 questions, these 4 questions actually. So first of all, what's the focus of the 2 paragraphs? What seems to be the structure of this methodology? Secondly, I want you to be on the hunt for passive voice verbs. So how and why are passive voice verbs used? Thirdly, linguistic terms. So I want you to identify 5 linguistic terms that you wouldn't have known as an English GCSE students. And then think about, well, what are they enabling you to do using those AO1 terms? And then finally, what are the issues that the student identified in conducting the process of the investigation? Right, here we go then. So the data was selected from 4 YouTube clips of GMB interviews featuring members of political parties discussing contemporary agendas, issues surrounding the Brexit vote, new policies, and re-referendum speculation. Each interview offered correlating features to enable like-for-like comparison. Transcribing spoken mode texts required a significant investment of time, but offered the opportunity to spot patterns in terms of conversational features, brackets overlapping, and complexities, such as the influence of interrogative forms, yes, no, direct, tag questions, on both the actual audience and the positioning of the wider viewership. The transcriptions were annotated in relation to the language levels. Grammar was analysed through the forms and functions of sentences and the extent to which they were used to negotiate power. Producing accurate quantitative data to reflect these patterns proved problematic due to the high frequency of overlapping in mixed-sex conversations, making it increasingly difficult to decode the boundaries between different utterances. In order to provide clarity to these situations, the videos were slowed. Yet the value of overlapping proved imperative to the evaluation of gender theory in later analysis. The value of figurative language was also considered, examining how shifts between Jauss's levels of formality helped construct representations and or exaggerate perspectives. Okay, so here's yet another A/A* methodology. Right, so first of all, look at the opening here, and what have we got in terms? Let's just hunt out some of the passive voice forms. That was one of the questions, wasn't it? And you should be able to spot a passive voice verb in the very first sentence. Have you found it? Yes, there it is on the first line. The data was selected. Okay, so what that's doing, it's depersonalizing it, it's taking the focus away from you who did the selecting, and it's putting the focus more on the process that's going on, and that's got to be good. So this is a bit like your GCSE science lab write-ups. That's what it's like. You wouldn't be writing those in very personalized way, would you? Because the focus should be on the process. So there you've got your passive voice. I'm spotting two more passive voice verbs in the second paragraph. The transcriptions were annotated, so there's one, and grammar was analysed. Okay, so what you're going to achieve is a kind of report style in using the passive voice like that. What else are we noticing? We're noticing plenty of AO1, aren't we? And by AO1, we're talking about linguistic terms. So in the first paragraph there, we've got words like overlapping, for example, which is a discourse term meaning people interrupting each other. And we've got interrogative forms. And it doesn't just stop there on interrogatives, because then the student has identified the different categories of interrogative forms, like yes-no questions, direct questions, and tag questions. So we've got those AO1 terms, and in the second paragraph we've got things like sentence forms and functions. So what else have we got? I'm on the hunt for other AO1 terms. There seems to be a lot of overlapping that's going on here. We've also got figurative lexis, which means non-literal lexis, like metaphors and personification and imagery and things like that. And we've also got youses, levels of formality. And please get the apostrophe of possession right there. It's going to go after the S, because the possessor has an S in the terminal position of their name. Okay, so plenty of AO1 terms that we've got there. Now, the other element that we were looking out for were issues, wasn't it? So what's he drawn attention to as a possible issue? Well, first of all, he's having a bit of a moan, isn't he, about transcribing and how long it's taken. Of course, he hasn't put it in those terms. He says it's required a significant investment of time, like that. But that really means that it took a heck of a long time for him to be transcribing his data, which is fair enough. The other thing that he's said is problematic is doing accurate quantitative data. So the kind of number crunching that you're doing when you're looking at sentences, for example, and trying to decode the boundaries between different utterances. So this student has drawn attention to those. Okay, so there's a couple of things there at least where it's drawing attention to the possible issues and problems. Okay, so I think I'll probably leave it there. There's enough there to get you going on your methodologies. And remember, because it's only 200 words, you're going to have to draft it and then redraft it and then redraft it. So it says the maximum amount in the fewest number of words possible. Okay, so good luck with your methodologies. Not that you'll need luck, just lots of skill and time. Thanks very much. And in my next video, we will reveal the secrets of the evaluation stroke conclusion. I can't wait.